Do you ever feel like you're fighting for your life when you hit a losing streak? Getting out of drawdown can be extremely uncomfortable, and it's one of the most overlooked skill sets in trading. I've been active in the market since 2011, so I've spent my fair share of time in drawdown and clawing out of it. In this video, I'll share the different reasons why you might be in a drawdown and simple solutions to get you back on the right track so you can start winning again. So grab your notebooks and let's get started. All right, let's go over drawdown and how to deal with drawdown. I know this is going to be a hot topic. There's a lot of struggling traders out there that just don't know how to manage their emotions while they're in drawdown. So this video is going to hopefully put you guys on the right track and kind of get your emotions in check, kind of identify the issues, what's causing drawdown, and how to battle it and how to claw out of it. And I'll give you some examples of me crawling out of drawdown myself. So let's talk about actually dealing with drawdown. Now, this was a snippet from a podcast that I listen to often. It's Chat with Traders, Best of Risk Management Part 1. And I'll leave a link in the description to this episode. But Dan Shapiro had a clip that was very, very important to me. He had mentioned every single trader that puts on risk is going to run into a buzzsaw. It's inevitable. The more screen time you get and the more hands the market gives you, you will run into a buzzsaw. You don't want to turn a paper cut into a severed head. So what is a buzzsaw? A buzzsaw is basically you're going to go through periods in your trading career, maybe throughout the year, and I experience this almost every year, where nothing you do is going to be correct. You're going to follow your system, your strategy, and no matter what you do, you're going to run into periods of losing streaks. That's just the law of probability. It's the law of large numbers, and it's inevitable when we're dealing with risk and the markets. So you're going to go through a period. And I'm sure you've been through maybe many of these periods where, you know, you're doing everything right, but you're still taking losses, or maybe you're doing things wrong and taking losses. But there's two different causes to that. So, right, we're going to first tackle the issue of identifying it. The first step in dealing with drawdown is to identify the cause of it. What is the root cause of this drawdown? Am I making mistakes with my system? Am I making mistakes with my emotional control? And are these things that I can actually control? Because if you can identify something that is in your control, right, there's solutions to that. But if it's not, if it's coming from a point of you following your system to a T and you're still taking losses, that has something to do with probabilities. Okay, so I think a lot of traders, they struggle with, right, they obviously maybe mark their losses as being bad luck. And I see it a lot with novice traders. It causes a lot of over trading, it causes a lot of revenge trading, and it causes a lot of over leveraging, trying to make money back, right? Chasing losses. So a lot of times, you know, when you take a loss, you might blame the market. And that's where the problems start piling up, is the lack of accountability. Accountability for your errors on your part, right? So we have to figure out what is actually causing me to be in this drawdown and how can I get out of it. All right, so the lack of accountability can lead to additional errors or compounded losses, right? And we're going to talk about, you know, dealing with prop versus personal, but in my opinion, they're very much similar. When you're dealing with a losing streak, it doesn't really matter what that threshold is. It's how can I stop the bleeding? Because no matter what, you're going to either blow up your personal account or blow up your prop account. And it's about minimizing those errors so you can get back on the right track, obviously, and get back on a winning streak and just build that confidence again. Because when you take a loss, your confidence is going to take a hit. Now, it all depends on how you deal with that emotion of taking that specific loss. If you have a hard time accepting losses for what they are, you're going to have a very hard time crawling out of drawdown, because you might make stupid mistakes. You might start doing martingale, which is doubling down after taking losses. And, you know, it can kind of pile on quickly. You know, it's basically a snowball effect. So let's get into the next slide. We're going to identify the type of drawdown. So drawdown can come in many different forms. The most important aspect to exiting a drawdown period is to identify what is causing it and how to reduce the effects. All right, so I'm going to categorize it as emotional errors, strategical errors, or basic probability. So a lack of identification or the wrong category that you're identifying can lead the trader to thinking their drawdown is due to basic probability, which may cause them to employ a martingale strategy, doubling down after a loss. That's basically if you make an emotional error. Let's say if I take a loss and now I'm angry at the market, and I say, the market is not wrong, you know, or I'm not wrong, the market is wrong. You might end up thinking the next trade, I'm going to make it back because there's no way that I can get this wrong, right? I've done my analysis. I have my, my bias, my thesis, and I'm placing risk in the market. There's no way I can get this wrong. So it'll cause you to double down on that next trade because there's no way you could be wrong, right? That is an emotional error through anger. Another, an example that I ran into somebody at the FX Summit last year, and essentially she had mentioned to me, and I hope she doesn't mind that I share the story if she's actually listening. She had mentioned to me that she was on the path to actually getting, I think it was a $20,000 to $30,000 payout, and her father had just passed away, and she wasn't in a good relationship with her mother, and her mother was a bit toxic towards her. I think it was partly because she was taking out, that specific event on her, and she was, reaching out to her and being, staying in contact with her, obviously. But being in that environment, right, that is quite a toxic environment. So all those negative pressures are going to possibly get you to have an emotional reaction, right? So what she had essentially did was, when she got in that fight with her mother, she had gone back home and essentially blew the account a couple days before the payout. Now, that really is an emotional error. And the emotional errors can come from various things. It can come from your environment. It can come from, toxic relationships. It can come from a variety of different things. So you have to understand what is putting me in this negative state of mind. Is it my actual trading performance, or is it something that's external to trading? Because identifying which one it is, then you can possibly find the solution. So maybe distancing yourself from this person or that specific environment. For me, I had to separate myself from everything that my friends were doing to try and focus on trading itself, because I wasn't in, the most positive environment in my own home. So I had to find ways to either block out that noise or just remove myself from that situation. So you have to understand, what might be causing that emotional error. Is it, trading related? Is it not trading related? Strategical errors, on the other hand, are going to be from your specific trading process. So your specific trading model, the technical edge that you're using, or the fundamental edge that you're using. Those strategical errors could boil down to impatience, waiting for your proper setups. Maybe you're taking the wrong setups. Maybe you're not executing them properly. Maybe you're not placing the proper stop loss. Maybe you're not using the proper risk management. Those are strategical errors, and those are things that you can quite easily fix as long as you can recognize them. And then basic probability, obviously, is just the law of large numbers, the law of randomness in the markets. So again, lack of identification is a big reason why a lot of people don't understand why they're in the drawdown, and it's hard for them to claw out because they don't know what's putting them in drawdown. First, you have to understand what is the root cause of you going in the drawdown, right? A lot of us, maybe we get angry, maybe we take trades that we shouldn't because of something else, right? Or maybe we're placing bad trades because we just don't know our edge enough. That's a strategical error. You have to understand how to categorize the errors that you're making. And that all comes down to journaling. It all comes down to self-reflection. You have to understand what is causing me to make these errors. Or are they even errors, right? If there's no errors, then you can only deduce that is going to be basic probability. All right, so examples of emotional errors, we have overtrading, revenge trading, ignoring stop losses, chasing winners, losers, panic, confirmation bias. Essentially, you're looking for reasons in the market that confirm your bias, even though maybe the market is telling you otherwise. Herd mentality, right? You're following other people, and overconfidence. So these can all lead to errors in our judgment and errors in our trading that might put us into a drawdown period, or might force us to make bad decisions which lead to additional losses. Okay, so if you take that first initial loss, you might be in a situation where you're doing one of these things. You might end up over trading or revenge trading, or ignoring your stop loss on the next one, right? You might move your stop loss even wider. And you have to accept that risk. Once you put that trade on, you have to accept the risk. Chasing winners and losers, that's obvious. Panicking, again, that could be coming from you're so focused on the P&L. And, you know, if you guys have time, I mentioned that I'm going to link that podcast episode in the description. I highly recommend you listen to it because there's so many gems from really veteran traders that talk about, you know, panicking and being so focused on the P&L that you can't execute in the market. And when you're trading, you want to focus on trading. You don't want to focus on the P&L. And I see a lot of people making errors where they're so focused on the P&L that they dig themselves into a deeper drawdown. So let's go over examples of strategic errors. Right, failure to adapt to market conditions. Maybe the market conditions are changing, and you're not recognizing that maybe we're going from consolidation period to an expansion period. Lack of understanding technical fundamental edge. Maybe you just don't know enough about the markets. So you're in a drawdown because you just don't understand how to find A+ setups. There's different reasons why you can be in a drawdown, and there's only a couple ways that you can survive that specific drawdown. If you're a bad trader, there's almost nothing that you can do to save you from going into a drawdown period, just because you're going to sustain more losses than you probably should because you don't have an edge. So again, understanding why you're in the drawdown. It's not because of bad luck. A lot of times, sometimes it can be bad luck if you already filtered out the other items. If you're already operating in a place of emotional balance and you understand your technical and fundamental edge, then it might be bad luck, okay? But most of the time, if you're watching this video, most of the time you have so many different flaws in your trading model and your trading system that it's not coming down to bad luck. It's coming down to all these other errors that you're making. Impatience, poor discipline, over leverage, right? Failure to have a clear exit strategy, and inadequate back testing and analysis. And somebody had mentioned to me, how do I get over the urgency of trying to make money, right? These are emotional errors that you're making because you're in a position of financial desperation. So first of all, in order to get out of a drawdown, you have to not care about the outcomes of trades, because the more and more you start caring about the next trade, the more likely you're vulnerable to make a mistake. So understanding, right, what is putting me in the drawdown and how can I get out of it? If I'm emotionally volatile, it's very, very difficult for you to even get out of a drawdown period. And not saying that experienced traders don't go through it, because they do. We definitely go through emotional highs and lows. It's just we've been through them enough to learn how to manage them. And another person had reached out and said, how do I control my emotions? And here's the thing with trading and in general is you can't control your emotions. You can understand your emotions, but it's very hard to say you can control your emotions. That would, if we could all control our emotions, none of us would get angry, none of us would get happy, none of us would be sad, none of us would be depressed. There's no way you can control your emotions. You have to learn how to manage them. And that's the big difference between somebody that is emotionally balanced versus somebody that's emotionally volatile. Is we know that we're possibly going to face adversity in our trading, but the person that's emotionally balanced can learn how to deal with it better. Because all of us as traders will go through periods, buzzsaw periods, where we get frustrated or we get angry at the markets. It's just, how do you manage that? If that specific emotional feeling is going to cause you to make errors in your judgment, then we have an issue, okay? If I get angry, I'm still going to come to the markets and operate the same way. That way, I know I'm not going to have any strategic errors. And I know that I'm still managing my emotional volatility. I'm not going to make any emotional errors because I know I'm angry, right? But I'm relying on my strategy to save me, my risk management, right? My stop loss placement, my patience around trading, things like that. So establishing proper risk parameters, and I'm going to talk about this in the lens of learning how to stop the bleeding, okay? So we're going to define our risk tolerance and establish max drawdown limits for your trading account. For prop accounts, this risk is already defined. So for CFD prop accounts, right, we obviously have either 8%, 10%, or 12% max drawdown limits, 5% daily drawdown limits. And then for futures, a lot of them are more trailing drawdown. So we already know how much we are willing to lose. When it comes to personal accounts, maybe you don't want to lose more than 15 to 20% of your personal account equity. Because, right, if we lose too much, let's say if we lose 50%, then it takes 100% to make back. Again, losses are compounded on the way down too. A lot of people don't recognize that. Is, let's say if I have a 10% max drawdown limit and I know my max losing streak is 10. What should I possibly do as I take losses? This is the best way to stop the bleeding. And what you should understand is dynamic risk is extremely, extremely important. Because let's say if I have 10 losses in a row before I blow the account. Well, if I take that first loss and cut my risk in half, now how many trades do I actually have? I have almost like 19 trades before I have to blow the account. And if I take another loss, let's say if I reduce my risk again, now I might have 30 or 40 trades before I blow the account. So as you go down into steeper amounts of drawdown, in my opinion, let's say you have your initial watermark balance, the further you get down below it, the more and more you should cut your risk, because you're not making any money at that point. You have to get back above the initial balance for you to even be in a comfort zone. So managing that drawdown on the way down, cutting your risk as it's going down, and this is where discipline comes into play. You have to be extremely, extremely disciplined when it comes to clawing out of drawdown, because this is, essentially you're severing your head off if you have a paper cut, because your losses are compounding, and maybe you want to risk more on that next trade to try and make it back. That's not the proper way of doing things, and I'm going to show you guys an example on this next slide of what that looks like, of you trying to flatline your drawdown. So, again, the deeper you go into drawdown, the more you can stop your bleeding by reducing the leverage or the risk. And I highly recommend the solution as the only option if you're on a losing streak. And I mentioned this on a podcast when I sat down. Just think of this as you being on a cold streak in basketball, just as an example. And if you're not from the US, we have statistics that say on average, we're making 50% of our shots. But let's say if I'm a shooter and my only role on the team is to score baskets. But let's say I'm 0 for 5. I'm on an extremely cold streak. Are you going to pass me the ball? And now I'm going to try and hit a three-pointer, which is, it's much less likely to make that basket. You have to find a way to stop the bleeding. They're not going to pass me the basketball because I'm on such a cold streak. So when you're thinking about your drawdown, are you on a cold streak or are you on a hot streak? Because that's how you should be managing your risk appropriately. I think static risk can be good if you understand what you're doing, and we'll get into a flow chart once I go over this next slide, but that really only comes if you're not making errors in those other areas, okay? So losses will compound on the way down. Now let's talk about, the effects of reduced leverage on losing streaks. So let's just assume that this 100 is our 100% account equity balance, and let's say if we take one loss. Let's just assume that, we're going to reduce our leverage after our second trade, after our third trade, after fourth trade, et cetera, et cetera. This is the effect of reducing your leverage on a drawdown period, is you're essentially flatlining your equity curve. And let's say you have a stop out limit, maybe down here. This is your stop out limit. If you don't reduce your leverage, right, you're running out of ammunition before you die, essentially. So when we're thinking about, what is our stop loss limit? How much is my max pain threshold? You can buy yourself more time based on reducing the risk. Now, it's going to come down to each and every one of you that's watching this video, because I can't sit in your seat and be disciplined for you. That's something that you guys have to work on your own. Am I disciplined or not? And that's essentially how you're going to claw out of drawdown. If you're not disciplined, you're basically trying to run uphill at 1,000 miles an hour. You're trying to get out of that drawdown period, and the odds are against you at that point, because you're making all these critical errors that's going to force you to make mistakes in your trading. So if you're making rash decisions emotionally, it's also going to have effect on your strategical edge, right? If you are so concerned about that next trade and you're so urgently trying to make money on that next trade, it's gonna leak into other areas of your trading. And I say this from experience, and you guys can comment below if you're facing issues like this. But the fact of the matter is, if you're an emotional trader, you are going to make lots of errors. And if you're worried about getting out of the drawdown rather than protecting your capital, you're going to make even more errors. Okay, so don't try and set a time limit on how fast I can get out of this drawdown period, because that's not the goal. The goal is to protect your capital, and the goal is to stop the bleeding. Okay, so again, the easiest way of doing things is cutting your risk. And some people have asked me, when is the right time to cut my risk? Well, it's appropriate to how you trade and your specific statistics and how are you trading? What is your edge? Are you a 1 to 2 risk reward trader? What's your max losing streak? How many losses have you sustained in a row? Not can you, but have you? How many losses have you actually taken in a row? Some people have taken 10, 20 losses in a row and haven't learned anything from it, or have kept the same risk, right? If you had reduced your risk, you would be in a much better position, and it would be easier to crawl out of the drawdown period. But instead, you're digging a deeper and deeper hole, and that's what we're depicting right here. Is you're digging yourself in a deeper and deeper hole if you're not recognizing the mistakes that you're making that's putting you in the drawdown, and if you're not managing your risk properly to get you out of the drawdown more easily. Okay, so let's dive into how do I know what I'm talking about? Well, this is just one of the examples that I basically went through last year of going in a negative 9% drawdown and then crawling all the way out of it. I think it took me, let's see, how long did it take me? So this was phase 2 on Funded Engineer. So I went into drawdown as soon as I got the credentials. And as you can see, I should have stopped the bleeding earlier. I still made a mistake and went down negative 5% pretty much in 2 or 3 trades. And then at that point, if you're in negative 5%, to try and get back to 0, right, and your max loss limit is 10%, I had to make 100%. But I didn't rush it. I just took my time. I just wanted to make sure that this equity curve was pointing upwards. When I got back above 5%, I got more comfortable risking 1% to 2% on that next trade, because I had already known that, I'm not going to go below a certain point. As long as I'm seeing like higher lows in my equity curve, I'm okay risking more. And that's where dynamic risk will come into play, is how do I stop the bleeding? Obviously, I went on crazy tilt straight off the bat. Extremely bad tilt. I would suggest should have never even gotten to negative 5%. But I made mistakes too. I'm human just like you guys. How do I get out of that is slowing down the frequency. Now, that's something that I actually didn't talk about was, right, either slowing down your frequency or reducing the risk, because both have the same effect. If you are comfortable taking 2 to 3 trades a week, and then all of a sudden you're in drawdown, and now you're taking 6 to 8 trades a week, now you're doubling the risk that you're taking and digging yourself in a hole. Or it could be one or the other. So frequency and risk both play an important factor in how fast you're going to get out of drawdown or how fast you're going to go into deeper drawdown. Okay, so this is like a double-edged sword where, yes, if you risk more, you can get out of drawdown faster, but again, if you trade more, you can get out of drawdown faster, but is that the right thing to do? Probably not. You probably want to reduce your frequency and you probably want to reduce your risk. Okay, so this is just an example of me crawling out of Drawdown. I posted my certificate on here, and I think I went on to make $25,000 on this account in profits just by being patient, just by finding the right setups and not panicking when I'm going into Drawdown. Okay, so let's go over to our flowchart. Yeah, and so we have a problem. Our problem is trading out of a Drawdown. Okay, and then how do we classify what's putting us into the Drawdown? First of all, we have to think about, is it an emotional error? Okay, and our emotional errors could be different causes, right? Lack of emotional control, revenge trading, overtrading, they all come from emotional errors. And trying to classify or identify, do I even have an emotional error? Because a lot of people, a lot of traders out there, they probably do have they are making emotional errors, but they're not man enough or they're not woman enough to accept the fact that they're making emotional errors. That's the biggest difference maker, is knowing that you're being emotional and taking your foot off that gas pedal. How many of you guys can actually do that? How many of you guys can get angry, come back the next day, and then operate like a professional? Okay? That is going to be the difference maker. If you're going to come into the markets the next day and try and take out your anger on the market, it's not going to bode well for you. All right? So understanding that emotional error, the cause of that emotional error, we have to find the solution to that, right? If we're being angry, what can we do? We can possibly meditate. We can think about these things. We can gauge our emotional levels when we're going into the market. And that's what you should be doing every day. Meditation can be a great tool, a great self-reflection tool, just to realize, what are these emotions that I'm feeling, right? You have fight or flight. Most of the time, we shut off when we get emotional, and our nervous system goes into just autopilot, and we start making poor decisions just based on survival instinct, right? And it's just human condition. You have to understand that we can take control of our minds, and we can be in a position of power over ourselves if we just recognize that we are acting emotionally. All right. So how can this be solved? Again, all of these are going to be, my solution is to be lower leverage, because lowering your leverage is going to allow you to be less emotional about the trade. It's going to take off some of the pressures of you trying to operate in the markets, and it's going to allow you to stop the bleeding in your account. That is like the biggest thing. When you're gushing blood everywhere, you have to apply a tourniquet somewhere. Okay. Identifying the emotional triggers, is it your spouse, financial problems, can't deal with losses? I know the retail trading space, it brings in a lot of traders that maybe are not in the financial position that they want to be, and the market preys upon those types of people. If you are desperate for money, if you have financial problems, it's going to make your trading worse. And I can't remember if it was Tom Dante or somebody else had mentioned it. I think they did an interview that said, basically the people that make the most money are usually the ones that don't need the money. And it's extremely true. So you have to understand, what is causing that emotional trigger. Can I actually fix it? Is there a solution to fixing it? And I'm not going to go over solutions to fixing these problems, because these are all personal problems, right? There's a reason why you're angry. For me personally, maybe I was getting in a fight with my father. He was very stubborn, and we both butted heads a lot. So obviously my trading took a massive performance hit if I got in a fight with him. Because I wanted to prove him wrong. I wanted to go to the markets and show him, I can make all this money. I don't need to go through the traditional way of getting a job or getting an education. These are all things that you guys have to gauge and be real with yourselves about, okay? So this, lowering our leverage and then identifying the emotional triggers, is going to do two things. It's going to allow us to trade until we recognize that we can fix our emotions and get back in sync with ourselves and with the market. So building up your confidence again before you increase that leverage. Lowering the leverage essentially just keeps you in the game, okay? But identifying the emotional triggers, that is what's going to set you up for success in the future, so you're not making the emotional errors anymore. You have to figure out what the trigger is, and then you can identify it ahead of time or during. You know, if I understand that I get in a fight with my wife, maybe, and I go and place a dumb trade, if I don't identify it properly, I'm going to keep making that same mistake. So if I get in a fight with my wife, I'm not going to trade. That's the solution. All right. And these are all personal. You have to figure out what are your emotional triggers. And don't tell me that you don't have any emotional triggers, because every one of us do. Just about being real with yourself and saying, I'm getting triggered by this thing that's bothering me. You know, maybe it's Twitter. Maybe somebody's getting on my nerves. Maybe some cartoon character online, anonymous poster on YouTube is getting on my nerves. It's going to impact your trading. Okay. So how do I avoid that? Maybe I have to do a meditation session before I actually start trading again. Or maybe just taking some time off. There's nothing wrong with taking a break from the markets. If you're riled up, if your blood pressure is increasing as you're trading and operating the markets, maybe it's time to just take a break. There's nothing wrong with taking a 2 or 3 day break. The markets will always be there. All right, the next type is going to be our strategic errors, causes, undisciplined, don't understand the strategy well. Solution, how can it be solved? Again, lower leverage. This will reduce our attachment to the outcome and avoid emotional errors. So, strategically, if you lower your leverage, or let's say if you don't lower your leverage, now you're more susceptible to making more emotional errors because you're in a drawdown. So if you don't lower your leverage, just your strategically, you're going to make errors because you're going to get more emotional, and it's just basically these two tying together. All right. So strategic errors will lead to emotional errors if you are not lowering your leverage properly. Okay. So again, lowering your leverage is an easy way to stop the bleeding, whatever the case is, even if it dials down to basic probability. Backtest more, right? Or understand the edge more, study and refine edge, obviously. So these are all things that need to be addressed if we're having strategical errors. So our strategical errors, basically, we're not following our system. All right. And again, it all comes down to discipline. The emotional side of things, the strategic side of things, it all comes down to discipline. Can you be disciplined enough to operate day in, day out, regardless of what's going on around you? Okay, regardless of all the emotions that we get built up as we're placing risk in the markets, or if we're not following our system. Can you follow your system day in, day out? That's the thing. Discipline in both of these areas is going to give you, is going to put you on the right track to getting out of that drawdown period. Then we have basic probability, right? The cause is just random walk theory. Basically, we're doing everything that we need to do strategically and emotionally. Our emotions are in check. We're following our plan to a T, and we're still taking a loss, okay? The solution, it can't be solved, okay? We cannot solve probability. There's no way that you could solve it. I don't care what you guys say. You're never going to have a 100% hit rate in the markets. At times, you're going to take A+ setups that look amazing, and they just run straight to your stop loss. And if that hasn't happened to you yet, then you're lacking experience in the markets. All right, so again, lowering our leverage is one of the easiest things that we could do to stop the bleeding and get us back out of drawdown. Or we can continue trading the same risk. That's only if you understand what is my max losing streak. So let's say over the course of 2 years, my max losing streak is 3. I've only ever taken 3 losses in a row. I'm not saying that's my personal statistics, because I've taken more than 3 losses in a row. It comes down to you. So I would only recommend continuing with the same risk if your max loss streak is under a certain number, okay? If you're trading on a personal account and you're okay losing 30% of your account, and your max losing streak is only 5 to 10, you don't have anything to worry about, okay? But when it comes down to basic probability, we have two options, right? It's either lower your leverage or continue trading with the same strategy because we're not making other errors in these other areas. All right. So this was a bit of a ramble. I know that, or I hope that you're at least taking notes from my experience and me actually crawling out of Drawdown, because crawling out of Drawdown, again, is extremely uncomfortable. People don't like being in Drawdown. And I had this discussion with some friends. With prop, you're essentially almost always in Drawdown if you're a profitable trader, because you're taking the payout, the balance resets, and now all of a sudden you have less Drawdown to work with. Okay? So, you know, with CFD prop firms at least, or even with your personal account, let's say if you're going to withdraw it and go back to your balance, the next trade, if you take a loss, you're back in Drawdown. Okay? So it's just something that you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. You have to get comfortable going on sustained losing streaks, not losing your head. That's where a lot of people will fail, is they go on a losing streak, they lose their cool, and then they make a poor judgment. All right? And I always think of ourselves as traders as high performance athletes. Now, when you're thinking about Tiger Woods or you're thinking about Kobe Bryant, you know, these guys, they've failed a lot too. It's just how do they deal with failure? They stick to the process. And that's all you can think of, is sticking to the process, not getting emotional. If you guys follow sports at all, follow the top athletes. See if they get emotional after losses. See how they deal with losses. All right? Do they accept responsibility for the losses? That's a big thing. The best leaders and the best high performers will accept responsibility for the situations that they're in, rather than placing the blame on their teammates, rather than placing the blame on referees, whatever the case is. Accept responsibility for the drawdown that you're in. And don't just chalk it up to bad luck, because if you chalk it up to bad luck, you're going to go into the markets and you're going to put on risk that you shouldn't put on. You know, if you relate to that, you know, drop a comment below, and I'd love to hear your story. But I know that there's a lot of traders that, and this is probably 95% of the losers, is they're operating out of emotion and maybe a little bit of both. Maybe they're operating out of emotion and they don't have an edge. If you don't have an edge, you're going to operate more out of emotion, right? You're basically just relying on emotion to make decisions. So you need to have both. Again, this is why trading is so difficult, because you cannot come into it and just think you can be a specialist in one area. You have to understand everything. You got to understand your strategy. You got to understand your emotions. You have to understand probability. There's so much that goes into it. And when you're getting out of Drawdown, you just want to build confidence. If you lack confidence, that could be the cause of different things. But a lot of times, if you lack confidence, you're either lacking in experience, you're lacking in edge, you're emotional because you don't have an edge, right? And it's basically just a full circle loop. You have to understand that strategic errors can cause emotional errors, and emotional errors can cause strategic errors, okay? And it's about reducing those errors as a whole. If you can't reduce the errors, the only other thing that you could do is lower your leverage. Stop operating in a way that I'm trying to hit it out of the park every single time. Like, that doesn't work for most people. You cannot come to the markets and say, this next trade is going to be the winner, because you have no idea if it's going to be the winner or not. So lowering your leverage is like literally one of the only things that you could do to reduce the attachment to our outcome. Okay, if you can't do that, you basically have no other safety net. And this is why I think risk management as a whole is the only thing that's going to save your ass when it really comes down to it. You know, when everything is boiled down, risk management is really the only thing that could save you. Because if you're on major tilt, nothing else can save you. If you're on major tilt and you're risking the same amount, nothing's going to save you, okay? So I hope you guys found this useful. If you want to learn more, if you want to understand how to trade like a business, because I treat my trading as a major business, make sure you check out this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment if you enjoyed this one. And I'll see you guys in the next one.